Right, I think we'll make a start. We may get some more joining as we go through, but welcome to this fourth of our webinars on productive forestry. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into welcoming our speakers for today. So as you'll see, we've got a chat function that you should be able to access throughout the webinar. So if you do have any questions at any point, please do put them in the chat. We will try and answer a few while the presentations are going on, but we will be answering them at the end. And my colleague and manager, Rebecca Naylor, will be sharing those questions for us. But if you do see a question that you do like, please do like it, give a thumbs up, because we will take preference to the ones with the most likes at the end. Also, the webinar is being recorded, so we won't share the slides afterwards, but we will share the link once of the recording once it's been uploaded to YouTube. So just to introduce everybody today, who we've got. So really privileged speakers today. I think we've got the highest caliber people that we can get for this productive forestry webinar. So we've got Chris Watson and John Burgess, who are both Forest Commission staff. They are woodland resilient advisors who work at a national level and have decades and decades of experience in forestry and managing and creating productive forests. Myself, I'm going to do a little bit stint on funding, which we'll see in a moment. And then two esteemed guest speakers. We've got Jeremy Ralph, from Director of Evolving Forest, a very forward-thinking organisation, and Robert South, who is a forest agent and Managing Director of Bromwyn and Abbey. So the agenda for today, what we're going to be covering in the webinar. So Chris is going to be looking at the what and why of productive forestry, what is productive forestry, and why we need to create productive forests. Jeremy is going to be then talking about the opportunities in productive forestry and ideas, why it's important, where we can get our timber into. John is going to then be talking about the practice of productive forestry, things that you might need to consider when you're thinking about creating a productive forest. I'm, as I mentioned before, going to look at the funding and support available for productive forestry. And then Robert is going to give the forest agent's perspective on productive forestry. And then obviously we'll have the panel questions. So I think we're there, so I'm going to hand over to Chris to kick us off. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much. I'll just make sure I've got control of the slides. I think I have, hopefully. It looks like I should have. Let's try. Slightly strange. Oh, right, there we go. Apparently it's working on my mouse. My mouse roller, but there we go. Right, thank you very much. Morning everyone, sorry for that slight hiccup there getting started. Yeah, so my name's Chris Watson. I'm a Woodland Resilience Advisor for Forestry Commission. And just for a little bit of context in terms of how my role fits into this conversation this morning, I spend a lot of time working on the sort of the commercial side of forestry with DEFRA, but then also integrate that into work that we do around woodland management, how we increase woodland management, how we get the right kind of woodland management, and then how that integrates with resilience as well. So my role sort of covers all those aspects, and you know, productive forestry, commercial forestry is very much a part of all of those areas that we look at. And what I want to do this morning really is just kind of make the case a little bit for productive forestry, why it's important, and try and think a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about productive forestry as well, and what that looks like in terms of the resource. So where I always start with any presentation on woodlands, forestry, trees, is to try and start actually just thinking about what the value is of our treescape, of our woodlands. Because there's obviously different ways of valuing what we talk about, and at a national level, at a societal level, our woodlands provide significant benefits. The natural capital asset value of these is around 175 billion. And this diagram that we're looking at here is taken from the 2018 Tree Health Resilience Strategy, and it gives you a feel for all the different values that our woodland provides. But one of the challenges we have with this is that not all of those values are readily available in terms of economic returns. So, as a landowner, your woodlands, the woodlands that we create, might be delivering these values to society, but it doesn't mean that there's a direct correlation between that and how that value then comes to you as a landowner or can be realised. But there's some crucial parts in that that's worth flagging that does allow us to generate some direct economic income, and forestry, wood processing is one of those areas. Carbon sequestration and some of the schemes through which we can pay for that is another area. And then obviously, as we'll discuss later, some of the grant funding and things which can also help support delivery against some of these other objectives. But I think it's just really important that we look at, before we start, that we look at the sort of the rounded values that our woodlands provide, and that commercial productive forestry sits within that range of values that we provide from our woodlands. And where I'm going to start is with a piece of policy which has recently been published. So at the end of February, the Forestry Minister announced a commitment to something called the Timbering Construction Roadmap. And the reason I'm flagging this is because actually I think this particular piece of policy, and I won't spend too long talking about policy, this particular piece of policy is probably the key document that we've got, which lays out our need for timber and wood products, and again by default for sustainable productive forestry. Essentially what it is the government's commitment to increase the use of timbering construction. So actually it's looking at the next step further down the line, beyond the woodlands. And crucially, the reason behind that is timber offers a solution that's a renewable, low carbon resource. It's got immense potential to reduce emissions, create jobs, and build the homes we need throughout the supply chain. So that's everything from the tree nurseries producing the trees to the end user that's building the house, or living in the house, or living in the building. So wood as a product, as a material, is something that the government's really well behind, and as you'll all be well aware, there's some significant targets around house building, construction, and obviously timbering construction feeds into that, and you can see immediately where this conversation starts to go. And what the implications of this policy are for productive forestry is the work areas that this piece of policy actually is looking at addressing. And there's 7 priorities that have been identified as part of this roadmap, which allow us to see an increase in use of timbering construction. And it covers everything from better understanding of how carbon moves through the process and understanding its storage, how we can build timber buildings safely, and obviously insurance and things like that come into play there. So there's a lot of other work we need to do to get timber increasingly used in buildings. However, there's one piece in here which is the area sort of our work on Forestry Commission are quite heavily involved with, which is increasing the sustainable supply of timber. Okay, and that sustainable part's really important there as well. We don't want to just increase the use of timber. We need to increase the use of timber sustainably and in an appropriate manner. And that obviously has some significant implications for the resource that we have and where we get our timber from. And to give you a bit of context around that, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these figures already, but I'll sort of go back over them. And these figures are produced regularly by Forest Research through the Forestry Statistics. But the UK currently imports 73% of the timber that it uses. Okay, so we are a significant importer. And that, to be frank, that's not going to change. We will always be a significant importer of timber. However, we don't operate in isolation. We operate in a global market. And by 2050, global demand for timber is expected to quadruple. Okay, so that as living standards go up, as economies develop around the globe, the increased use of timber and interest in the use of timber equally increases. And that during that same time frame, we're going to see a peak in UK production of timber. Okay, so the amount of wood that we can produce in this country is going to peak around 2030 based on the existing resource, and then it will slowly start to tail off again. And during that same time period, globally, availability of timber isn't expected to increase. So although the demand for timber is increasing, the supply is actually likely to be quite constrained. And when you look at some of the trends and patterns that have happened in terms of the resource within this country, you know, sustainable forestry practice, protection of important habitats, all that kind of stuff, which is totally right to happen, those same processes are happening internationally as well, along with climate change issues, which are impacting the ability to access timber. There's a range of factors influencing this, but essentially global supply is likely to be constrained. So that starts to put pressure on our supply chains. But what it does do is mean that there's definitely going to be demand for timber in the future. Which brings me to thinking about the resource that we've got in England. And I'm going to talk about England, although it's difficult sometimes when we talk about timber because the timber industry in the UK really is a UK industry. But I'm gonna focus for the purposes of today largely on England. And I'll summarise our woodland area here. But what you can see essentially is that in England our woodland resource is predominantly broadleaf. Okay, and what I'm drawing your attention to here, beyond just the hectareage of the woodland resource, is the makeup of that woodland resource. The figure on the diagram on the slide is taken from Keepers of Time, which is the government's position on ancient native woodlands. And what you can see within there is that not only we have the sort of divide between what is broadleaf woodland, what is conifer woodland, but also there's some designations in there which are really important. So things like pause woodlands, where we perhaps have a lot of conifer currently, those areas are likely going to see constraints. They are seeing constraints in terms of what we can do with those woodlands in terms of timber production, because we're trying to manage the habitats there as well, and we've got other priorities on those sites at the same time. So there's other factors affecting the availability of our resource, and you know, where we've got broadleaf woodlands, we're not going to replace those broadleaf woodlands with conifer woodlands. So there's whilst the resource exists, that is the nature of the resource that we've got. And then to put that in a bit more context, what is that resource that we actually need? So that's the resource that we've got. What is the resource that we need? And out of all the softwood removals in England, we generated just shy of 2 million green tonnes of timber. Okay. And what that actually means is that about 23% of our woodland area was producing 73% of the timber being produced, essentially, in England. Okay. That's the softwood resource, that's the conifer resource. The conifer resource is producing 73% of the timber that we're producing, and that's from 23% of the area. So you can see that conifer resource is the part that's doing the heavy lifting in terms of timber use. And the diagram on here, hopefully you can see it clearly enough. But if you can't, this is taken from Forestry statistics. You can see the breakout of how that timber is used, and a significant proportion of that is used as timber. It's used as fencing. It goes to pulp mills, panel boards. All of those uses are, to a greater or lesser extent, are locking up that timber in terms of carbon and securing that carbon for the future. So not only is it a renewable resource, but it's got that sort of second life as carbon storage as well, which is really important. If we compare that to the hardwood resource, interestingly enough, there isn't a neat England figure for hardwoods. It's a UK figure, and that speaks something of the nature of the industry and the data that's behind that. Across the whole of the UK, we only produced 800,000 green tonnes in 2023. Okay, so over that same time period, we only produced 800,000 green tonnes. So significantly less than what was being produced just in England in terms of timber, and that's at a UK level. But what's also really important to flag as part of this is what that timber gets used for, or what that wood gets used for. And you can see from this diagram that the majority of that goes as wood fuel. Okay, so I'm not knocking the wood fuel market. It's a really important market. It serves its purpose, but we aren't producing a lot of timber from that resource. What we're producing is wood fuel. Okay. So essentially, we need more conifers. If I'm being blunt, we need to grow more conifers. Why do we need to grow more conifers? Well, there's a number of reasons. We need fast growth. All right. One of the key points which I'll mention later around tree planting targets is that we're trying to hit carbon targets and climate mitigation targets, and part of that actually is conifers grow quickly. But economically, that's also really beneficial. Okay, because your return is going to be much quicker. Conifers have a naturally useful form. If you put conifers in the ground and spare in a few major disasters, essentially shut the gate and come back, you will have timber of some form. That's not necessarily the case with broadleaves. In fact, it's not usually the case with broadleaves. The timber properties that we get out of softwoods is the timber properties that people are looking for. Even if we didn't produce any of our own timber, we would still be importing softwoods, because internationally that is what is used because of the properties of softwood timber. And clearly, therefore, the market demand is for softwoods. And that's not something that's just a UK market, it's an international market. And then the other important point, which I think we've got to be open and honest about, is that between 2000 and 2024, the area of conifer woodland, the area of ground covered by conifers in England, decreased by 48,000 hectares. Now, there's a number of different reasons behind that. Some of it's habitat restoration, some of it's restructuring through UKFS. There's a number of reasons, but regardless of that, the point is that the productive conifer resource has reduced, okay, at a time when we've seen an increase in demand. So obviously, conifers are doing the heavy lifting. That's what we want to see more of. But we haven't got to forget about our broadleaves. The majority of our resource is broadleaved, and it will likely continue to be so. Okay, there's a whole host of reasons why we want more broadleaves. Okay, we're not knocking that at all. But what I'm saying is, from a productive point of view, we've got to think about that in terms of, well, what's the implications for that? Okay, broadleaves can produce timber, all right, and the management of our woodlands, which can be underpinned by timber sales, and this is the crucial point in terms of sustainability. The production of timber and the management of our woodlands goes hand in hand. So essentially, we can pay for the good management of our woodlands through the production of timber, and producing timber quality hardwoods, broadleaves, actually can be really beneficial in terms of the returns that you make and in terms of how cost effective those operations can be. But we need to be a bit intentional about that. And it seems to me that whilst at the minute there's really strong wood fuel markets, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, if we're serious about the value of timber and wood products as locking up carbon, it makes an awful lot of sense if we can lock that up as timber rather than burning it. Burning it should be sort of, in terms of hierarchy, that should come after we've tried to use the timber for other purposes and lock up that carbon longer term. So we've got to think about our broadleaf resource as well, and it's not just about conifers. And then, with all that being said, I want to put our tree planting into a bit of context. So we have a statutory tree planting target which aims to hit about 16.5% of, well, not about, exactly 16.5% tree cover by 2050. And underpinning that tree target, nature recovery and carbon sequestration are key objectives. And like I say, there's reason we want more broadleaves and things like that as well. So those are the kind of big underpinning objectives of that tree planting target. But crucially, by increasing the area of woodland, we can also increase the area of productive planting. Okay, the two things aren't mutually exclusive, as in the other objectives and timber production aren't mutually exclusive. We can do both on the same ground. And one of the key assumptions behind the planting target is that 30% of the planting will be conifer, and that's really important for hitting our carbon sequestration targets, or hitting net zero targets. We need that early fast growth of conifer to be able to bring that carbon sequestration level up. All right, so there's even an assumption in there that that's what we're going to hit. So hopefully from that you can see that at a national level there's a demand for timber. There's going to be a continuing demand for timber. It's a great renewable resource. It's something we want to see a lot more of. We have some constraints in terms of our existing resource. We need to be able to increase the size of that resource and make better use of the existing resource. And also, yeah, from a forward look kind of point of view, that the demand for that timber, that productive forestry, isn't about to go away. Okay, and our woodland creation targets, etc., can help us develop that resource. But that's looking at a national level. What's the value as a landowner? Well, there's a number of different advantages to productive woodlands and timber production. First of all, diversification of business. I mean, for full clarity, we farm at home, and if we had woodlands on our farm, we don't. But if we did, I can assure you that those woodlands would be working along with the rest of the farm. For me, that's just a no-brainer. It's another form of income. There's a number of different forms of income they can deliver. If you've got that on your land, why not use it? The sale of timber got some tax advantages. Okay, we want to try and encourage people to produce and sell timber, and the tax advantages of that aren't to be overlooked. And crucially, it's the original sort of growing resource. You put trees in the ground with a view to produce some timber with them. The value of that resource literally grows over time. Okay, and you can look at that resource and know that the value is increasing in that. And if you get to a point where you've got enough woodland, that value sits there, and you can then use that as it suits. Okay, so it's a useful additional asset to have to hand. Creating new productive woodland as well can be really, really beneficial. If you've got some woodland existing on your farm or on your estate, the creation of more woodland tactically can really help make the management of those existing woodlands more viable. So frequently, one of the challenges we've got is that cost side of woodland management, the scale of costs associated with the scale of the woodland, and small woodlands can be tricky to manage economically. If you can increase the size of those woodlands and the woodland asset by increasing the area of woodland in total, you can go a long way to helping the economics of that. At a really simple level, you can produce a lot of biomass and wood fuel. If you're heating your home or your business is using wood fuel, then why not produce a sustainable supply of that yourself? Why buy it in? I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. And also something that I say frequently, time and time again, is having a woodland asset on your own property can also be a really good basis for a woodland-based enterprise, whether that be contracting, sawmilling, fuel wood supply. It can really form an underpinning for that business. And managing your own woodlands, equipment to manage your own woodlands, is equipment that is then available to manage other people's woodlands on a contract basis or whatever. So there's any number of advantages to managing woodlands productively and creating more productive woodlands. And I'll let others talk about the mechanics of that and some of the funding, etc., associated with it. There we go. And oh, sorry, beg your pardon, I'll go back one. And just to wrap up, I just wanted to make some key points, okay, to summarise what I've said. So demand for timber is only going to increase, okay. That's a certainty. Timber and wood production is really good for underpinning other woodland management. Okay, it's not mutually exclusive. We can turn the dial up and down in terms of how much we want to focus on other objectives and how much we want to focus on timber. But crucially, that sale of wood products, the sale of timber, can pay for most of the woodland operations we probably want to do. But crucially, timber production needs to be planned from the start. If you're going to produce timber, especially in broadleaves, you've got to plan for that to be the case right from the start. And John will talk about that in length in a bit. But it's just a flag that just putting trees in the ground doesn't mean you end up with timber. You might end up with firewood, fuel wood, but it doesn't mean you end up with timber. There needs to be some planning in there. Timber sales genuinely can be a really good diversification. Timber, people are often surprised at how much, at the right scale, timber can be worth, and especially with softwoods, that's something that I think can't be overlooked. And then the other thing I would say is productive woodland should be created to meet your needs. All right. There isn't a model under which you create a new woodland or under which you manage your woodland. It's got to fit in with the other objectives that you've got. What I'm trying to say, though, is that ability to produce timber and to be productive can help to underpin and support those other objectives. And I think that's me done. I don't think I was too far over time.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I'm going to hand over to Jez now, if you're able to come in.
Excellent. Yep. Hi, all. I think someone needs to give me control.
You should have it. I think you should have it, Jez. Looks like you've got it.
I do now, yes. I mean, probably no one should put me in control of anything, but for the purposes of the next 10 minutes, it's all mine. Great. Thanks, Chris. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased there's so many people here on such a nice afternoon, taking up your lunchtime to be here. Joe asked us if we just give a talk about timber production and prioritising environmental, social health. And what we're going to do is just present a couple of case studies of some of the work that we're involved in. And I think it's worth starting by just putting in context who on earth we are and why we're here. So we have a small business, we're based in Devon, Evolving Forests, and our work encompasses quite a wide area. We have a small team that includes an ecologist, a built environment specialist, a forester, and media production specialist. So at any one time, we might be out filming, we might be undertaking ecological assessments, or we might be working with architects and engineers on large-scale projects looking for better timber resources. And within all that, I guess our sort of take is that we are species agnostic. We don't really differentiate conifer, broadleaf, native, not native. We're kind of, what we're really interested in is about the long-term future and resilience and how we get there without being defined by concepts that might be sort of outmoded or outdated. And we're really interested in innovative solutions. We're kind of pushing the boundaries, I guess, appreciating that we're quite idealist and not everything we do is going to take off, but we feel it excites us, it's fun, and we feel it's important. And so, yes. I suppose the starting point for us to talk about productive forestry and opportunities is to ask where we're going. And for us as an organisation, the idea that there might be productive forestry and non-productive forestry as two different things, we just need to move away from. It's time for us to be a little bit more grown up and find a middle way. And this image is a continuous cover stand on an estate near us. It's kind of remarkable that it's 80 years in transformation. It's got a mixture of conifer and broadleaf species and a mixture of age classes in it. And certainly with the kind of people we deal with, we find most woodland owners and managers are to one extent or another moving their forests towards this kind of format of either single tree selection or small coop fellings, moving away from traditional productive forestry and moving away from traditional environmental forestry to something that delivers both. But these things take an awful long time, 70 or 80 years maybe, to transform a single species crop to this kind of thing. And at the same time, there's a huge diversity and complexity of what's around in that interim. And it's that we're interested in. If we want to use more of our own timber in products in an environmentally conscious way, we need to be more expansive in our minds about what quality timber is. And that's where a lot of our work is aimed at. So I want to first talk about some work we've been doing with the Woodland Trust. And I think one of the things that quite excites us is that, I come out of a productive forestry background. I trained in Scotland. I'm not even sure we saw a broadleaf tree when I was studying at Aberdeen. But we're now in a place where we enjoy working with all parts of the sector, and we get just as much in productive forestry working with the Woodland Trust as we do with more commercial partners that we have. And we work with people trying to find that middle space. And so our work with the Woodland Trust that I'm going to talk about today is based on Dartmoor. It's right next to where we live. And there's a concern about the state of woodland and forestry on Dartmoor. And there's some problem species and there's some opportunity species. And we wanted to know how those can be brought into a productive element that enhances the environmental state of the forests and the forest reserve. So we picked species to look at. We looked at beech because it's a problem species in southern England. As you can see from this photo, doesn't provide particularly good understory. It doesn't like being too dry or too wet, which is problematic given our future climate. But there are thousands and thousands of hectares of it in southern England. We picked western hemlock because it regenerates to such an extent that it's really problematic to know what to do with that natural regeneration that crowds out almost any other ground flora. And we looked at alder because it's a potential species. People are planting it down here as an ash replacement, and we don't really know much about it. It's kind of exciting to explore where that might go. And the first part of this was to undertake a survey, see what's actually out there. Although we got the National Forest Inventory, it's very accurate, but accurate only to a level. And as people involved in the construction industry, what we need to know about species properties within the woodlands is more detailed than you can get out of the National Forest Inventory. And I think it's worth sort of briefly mentioning now that the only thing that enables us to do fast inventory of large areas of forestry is digital technologies. And we now do not ever take out diameter tapes or tape measures or calipers or anything like that. Our iPad is our single tool for virtually everything, and it enables us to use the LiDAR sensor on it to undertake very large areas of very accurate inventory work. And this is what we found, and it sort of mirrors what Chris was just saying. The woodland type by area on Dartmoor is dominated by conifers, but by number of woodlands by broadleafs. And this is kind of so symptomatic of probably most of the country. There's smaller numbers of large areas of conifer and larger numbers of small areas of broadleaf woodland. All that conifer on Dartmoor is generally Sitka spruce. It grows very well. There's good markets for it. It's good quality timber. That kind of thing is done. We're not entirely concerned about that in this project. The market's developed. What we're interested in are these large numbers of broadleaf woodlands and smaller areas of conifer and what can be done with them. And so our interest, the Woodland Trust interest was these woodlands are generally in relatively poor condition. They're overstood. If people understand what basal area is, they have a very high basal area. They're very shaded, and that means the underlying ecology and soil health is potentially suffering. And what do we do about these? That in order to manage these woodlands better, there has to be a market for the products from them. Yet the timber isn't always like the best quality Douglas fir or Sitka spruce that has an obvious and ready market. So we took these three species and undertook a load of prototyping of very ordinary and very boring timber products. And so we had made from them building reg compliant window frames, on the left here, one for each species. In the center here is an internal door made of alder. Everyone, the sawmiller, the joiner, everyone loved working with the alder, except for the kiln operator, because it's so full of water. But as a potential species, it just showed how much benefit there is of looking outside the normal scope of what we think of as commercial species. And on the right here is beech glulam. This is made by Buckland Timber in Devon, and it's now this is a new dwelling, a farmhouse in the Blackdown Hills. And that's a radical development. It is using a problematic species in the UK that they've now developed into a viable product that they sell increasing volumes of. And then I want to move on to the second case study I want to quickly look at is not in this country at all, although it may as well be. This picture is from Galicia in northern Spain. It could be South Hams where we are now. It's incredibly mixed forestry. It's a very lush and beautiful environment, but it's no different from lots of parts of England. In the town of Lugo, they have the civil authority has sort of stated they want, if they're going to support building and if they're going to fund any building of civic buildings, the timber not only has to come from within 100 kilometres, but it has to be processed within 100 kilometres as well. And it's become an actual thing. It's become a reality. And this is, for us, absolutely fascinating, because what is untypical in the UK about Galicia is the sheer number of woodland owners. There are about 10,000 woodland owners in this one small area. Every rural household has a couple of hectares. And in this country, you turn around and say, well, that's ridiculous. We can't manage that. How on earth are we going to get productive timber from this? And the way they've done it is to undertake contractual negotiations. Basically, the local timber processing sector undertakes contractually to buy the timber that every owner grows, and it does that at the point of planting. And that is just incredible long-term thinking, that the sawmill is prepared to sign a contract that's going to come to fruition in 40 years' time. And if you plant and manage the right species, the right way, that it's fully certified, they will guarantee to buy that timber when it is mature. And it's a really interesting model for us to look at for future productive forestry, especially where, like on Dartmoor, there's a lot of small owners. They get their timber in, and it's in a whole range of species that in this country, from a standard centralized sawmill point of view, you just think, I just don't want to know. How are we going to deal with this? And what's happened is the local processing capacity has had to undertake R&D and adaptive research to use these species. And the first result of this is this building that's on this slide. This is the Impulso Verde building in Lugo, and it's an office and event space owned by the Civic Authority. And it uses 3 predominant sources of construction typologies that are focused on the supply. All of this building is designed based on what the supply from the forest is. And I think if there's just one thing to take away from what I'm saying, is that we as woodland owners and foresters need to be more bullish about saying, this is what we can supply, you design with that. And so it has a cross-laminated timber core made of one species. It has this glue laminated facade made of a different species, and it has this slightly crazy eucalyptus grid shell roof. 3 different species, 3 different properties, 3 different building types to enable the construction of what is quite an impressive building. And then finally, I suppose taking what Chris said about biomass and wood fuel, we hate biomass. We hate wood fuel. It feels like such sort of, I don't know, low entrepreneurial hanging fruit. And in our experience of all the estates we deal with, most have an intention to get rid of their biomass boilers at the end of the renewable heat incentive scheme, um, and move to other sources of heat. And I think there is a big question about the appropriateness of the biomass markets in the long-term future. And one of the things we're looking at is what other markets for really low quality timber, of which there is a huge amount. Is there, using a lot of this low quality timber from unmanaged broadleaf woodlands will enable them better management for environmental purposes. And how do we go about that? And as an example, loads of timber samples behind me, but actually the best value for money, this is a bar of soap, and the extracted sandalwood oil in this bar of soap per gram or kilo or whatever you want is worth way, way more than any other construction product. And anything that's made of plastic, pharmaceuticals, anything that smells that's currently made of oil-based products, we can make out of timber. And these are potentially huge markets for us. In this particular case, this is us doing some R&D into the use of bark as a byproduct. So birch bark on the left, but sequoia bark, which the mills hate, is really thick and fibrous. What can we do with it? What happens if we put it in a veneer press? There's plenty of redundant veneer presses in the UK. And this was compressed into board material to make furniture. This furniture, if anyone's in London, is now in the V&A, in the furniture galleries up there, as a way of talking about the future use of bio-based materials. And I think these kind of examples of biodistillation and bio-based materials are possibly the future for an awful lot of the products from woodland. I'd like to finish, though, by just stressing a couple of things. One of the things that Chris said is, if you want timber for construction, it has to be planned from the start. I mean, a forester said to me, "Oh, what's happened there?" Someone do that? Can I fix that? Anyway, timber production has to be planned from the start, and within that, within the planting of woodland, the managing of woodland, the harvesting of woodland, I think it's critical to remember that as woodland gets more complex, as we move to woodland that is both productive and environmentally sound, that complexity more than ever means that we need silviculturalists. And none of this works unless there are people around who are properly trained to understand and undertake what is quite detailed and important work. Just the act of thinning, I find mind-blowingly complicated. The different ways you can go about it. It's fascinating and it's nerve-wracking to undertake, but without people that properly understand that, without using professional and deep thinking silviculturalists, we'll end up in a situation in this country, and in England in particular, where we just do not have any productive woodland and we have no timber coming out from it. And I think our duty, our ethical duty, is not about what we want now, but about what our great grandchildren and great great grandchildren are going to need. And they're going to need not just healthy woodlands, but healthy woodlands that produce timber as well. And it's our duty to start planning for that now. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jez. That was brilliant, really inspiring and thought-provoking. I'm going to hand over to John Burgess now, who's going to talk about a little bit about the practicalities of starting a productive woodland. Thank you, John.
Yes, good afternoon, all. Jez just waxed lyrical there about the need for trained silviculturists, so I'm not quite sure I feel brave enough to step up into that slot, but I am going to run you through what we need to do to actually manage the woods, to grow the woods, and just to give you a little bit of a sort of an insight into the world of a forester. Just looking at how I move the slides forward. Can't seem to be doing that. Joe, if you could guide me into how to move the slides forward, I'd be very grateful.
Cursor at the bottom should be there, John, if you got it.
That's not showing up. If I could ask you to move the slides forward for me.
Oh, I can't do it either for some reason. Let's see if I can.
I don't have control there. I've taken myself off control.
Maybe if you just sort of take the presentation down and reload, Joe, would that help? Okay, so I'll just introduce myself. I work for the Forestry Commission. I am a woodland resilience officer. I work alongside Chris, the first speaker there. And I'm going to, brilliant, there we go, there's my first slide. And I'm just, like I said, going to just run you through the practicalities of how we plan and then manage the forest to get all those benefits that we've heard about. So the very first thing, and Jez was talking about this, is what are the aims for the new woodland? Everyone's encouraged, turned up to this webinar to want to know how to plant forests. But the question I get asked is, what trees should I plant? How should I plant them? Where should I plant them? My question back is, well, what are your aims? Why are you planting this woodland? Because we're talking about productive woodland, there's probably some element of income. Do you just want income up front? Do you want to just take the grants that are available, the additional contributions? Oh, that's jumped forward a slide. Thank you. Or do you want that long-term steady flow of timber income once we start to harvest the wood? That's a really important. So understand the finances of the forest, but also understand the time that you have available to manage the forest. It's not going to be as intensive as a crop. You're not going to need to spray and harvest every single year and then till and then replant. Forests are much lower management input, but they do require some time, and they require at certain times of the year in a way that hopefully will fit into a farm cycle neatly and support that and make that sort of a more diverse income flow for the farm business. So understanding that at the start is absolutely critical. The second step is to understand the site. Now that comes from soils. Every soil will support a different range of tree species. Some are very easy and will support a huge range, sort of deep, fertile, free draining soil at the bottom of the valley. You can plant pretty much what you like on there. But if you get to a very dry site or a very exposed hilltop site, your species range is limited. So understand the soils, understand your local climate, the rainfall pattern, the wind. Obviously, trees get very tall as they grow. You might be able to grow some trees when they're seedlings, but when they're 30 meters tall, they're going to catch the wind fully. And will the species like that? And then think about the site constraints, the right tree in the right place. We don't want to plant where we will do net negative impact. So scheduled ancient monuments, chalk grassland that's species rich. We just avoid all these things, and that's the Forestry Commission's role to regulate. So once you've understood your aims and objectives and you've understood your site, then and only then should you select the species. Next slide, please. And there are lots of species to choose from. For every niche location, you can choose a tree species or a group of tree species that will fit that site, that will grow well together. If we just look at native species, that is a very, very small palette. Due to the quirks of history through the last ice age and the glacial coverage and then the breaking of the land bridge with France, we don't have many native species. We have an impoverished list of tree species compared to Europe. In Europe, there are, I believe, 3,000 tree species. In England, we have native, depending how you count the willows and the white beams, about 50 or 60 native species. And I'll just say again, Europe, 3,000. Worldwide, and we can import species from elsewhere in the world that have very similar climates. The Pacific Northwest and parts of Japan, really very similar climates to the UK. The trees that we bring over grow exceptionally well. Japanese red cedar, Douglas fir, Sitka spruce. And they fit very well together in these new combinations of species. So looking at a broader palette of species rather than just focusing on the native. As Jez said, species agnostic. Does the tree meet your aims? Then it's a good tree. Next slide, please. But thinking about the future, it's really important because we can get trees growing today, but the climate is changing. We need to absolutely make sure those trees are fit for the future. This slide shows the little tree in the southwest of England is where I'm sat in my office. And the dark red shows the climate that is currently being experienced that we will experience in 2070. So in 50 years' time, that climate band will have moved north to cover where we are. Now that looks at temperature, growing season and rainfall. It doesn't look at windiness. We can't predict how windy it will be in 2070. But that temperature band, that rainfall pattern results in different forest compositions. We can have some tree species that do occur through that whole range, but they have different genetic provenances. They're more adapted to drought, which is a big climate threat. So we should be looking at the trees that are occurring in this band and possibly helping them move north, jumping them over the channel. They have very similar ecology, very similar biodiversity that they support, and integrating those in our forest with our native species, and then not putting all our eggs in one basket, in one species basket, and just keeping planting oak, creating a portfolio approach where we mix these together. Next slide. But then trees are not one size fits all. So here is a map of the growth rates that we predict that Douglas fir will have across the southwest. And I've just zoomed in on the southwest because it's really a good place for Douglas fir. Douglas fir is a really high value, great timber, very structurally sound for use in construction. But depending which dot on the map, which field you plant it in, it will grow differently. The higher the yield class, the darker the colour on the map. And we can see on the Somerset levels, it's too wet. On Dartmoor, it's too exposed, too acidic soil. And in the west, in Cornwall, it just gets blasted by the Atlantic gales, which Douglas fir doesn't like. But some of the deep, free-draining Devon red sandstone soils throughout sort of the West Devon, it's absolutely in its niche. And that's where we should focus this one particular species. And in the dots where this one won't do so well, we plant other species. Next slide, please. And here's just a slide to show you the annual growth rings of a tree. Slow grown versus fast grown. There is a myth that fast grown trees are not as strong. Well, that's just simply not true. Edinburgh Napier University, who do stress grading for timber, have been working for decades to dispel the myth. Difference between species is valid. So oak is not as strong as, is much stronger than birch. We know that. That's not going to change. We can't grow birch as strong as oak. But some of the softwoods, if we grow them faster, they're no weaker. But the place we get them from on the tree is really relevant to the strength, to the uses it has in timber. And we can use the whole tree. I've put the picture of the different piles of saw logs. They're different sizes and qualities of saw log. You need a large enough scale, but when you fell the tree, you'll separate each of those bits of the tree into different piles, and each of those piles will go to a different sawmill and have a different use. And as Jez was talking about, maybe some of the waste product is also usable. So the highest value will be the saw log. That's the base of the tree, the biggest, thickest, hopefully straight, hopefully not free, good quality logs that can be just turned into construction timber. And then as you go up the tree, you usually go down the grade of price curves, ultimately ending in pulp and firewood. But if there are some innovative uses as well, because you can sell the foliage to the people who design the floral bouquets. They always have a spray of an evergreen in the back of it just to give it some colour. So you can sell other parts of the trees if you've got the nous. Next slide. But there are other things than just timber that will give you an income from that wood. So timber and wood feel absolutely, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about timber construction and productive forest. But you can sell carbon. Now that is a whole webinar in itself, and I'm not going to go into it too much now. But if you're thinking of planting a forest now and you're above 2 or 3 hectares, really please do look at the opportunity to register that site for carbon sales and then to sell the carbon units as well. And those units are available if you harvest the timber, but you lose the units of the timber that's driven off site, but you retain the carbon that's sequestered in the soil. It's moderately complex, but do bear that in mind. And then there are other recreations. Planting trees makes the landscape much more attractive and more beautiful, and you can then have people paying to spend time on that land as glamping pods, forest school, and many other things. So those recreational opportunities that come from people wanting to spend their time in the forest. But well-managed forest is absolutely essential. Leaving a forest alone isn't good for the forest. The trees are less healthy. By intervening in the forest, we have a wide range of benefits. I'm going to point out the one in the top, increased biodiversity. By harvesting timber from the wood sensitively, we create more opportunities for wildlife through having light and air reaching the forest floor. That creates the forest flowers that produce nectar, that get all those insects that are the base of the food chain. But it is more resilient against the threats of climate change. Next slide. So how do we go about managing the forest? Well, when we plant the trees, before we even start to plant the trees, we need to control the weeds. Absolutely essential. Trees are not greatly competitive against some of the weed species that we have. I say a weed as in a plant in the wrong place. If you're planting into an ex-agricultural site, you'll have a thick grass sward. The tree seed to germinate down through the grass sward, to taking the moisture out of the soil in a long dry summer. Just need to think about those and how you tip the scales and the balance of the tree. In the first couple of years, then it might start to get more brambly, and the brambles will climb up into the tree and pull the young tree seedling over. So weed control, absolutely critical. Once the trees are growing, then think about protecting them from deer, rabbits, voles, all those hungry mouths that want to eat our tasty trees. Once the trees get then up to a couple of meters, start to think about formative pruning. This creates a knot-free stem. That increases the value. So it is investing in the crop, but removing some of those lower branches encourages the tree to grow upright, to grow straight, and to like higher value timber. Bottom left now, thinking about maintaining and creating access. Plan for how you are going to manage that woodland in future, how you're going to access the timber. Maybe you don't need to install a forest road when you plant the wood, but think about where it might go, avoiding wet flushes, following the contour of the hill, how you're going to get that timber out. Timber is a big, heavy product. You want to have the easiest access to the tarmac so that the timber lorries can get in and get out. Thin regularly, thin early and thin regularly. I'm going to talk about thinning in the next slide, but plan for that harvest and plan for how you're going to get the next crop of trees away halfway through that first rotation of trees. It's long-term thinking in forestry, absolutely. Next slide. Okay, so thinning. This is what makes the difference between a good, healthy, biodiverse, resilient forest and one, to use slightly negative terms, neglected, wasted opportunity, overgrown, dark shaded forest. Thinning is the removal of selected trees from a stand. The picture at the top right shows that you've removed a tree with a wiggly stem in the middle. You've removed one that's being suppressed and strangled by its neighbours. Okay, well, let's remove that. Let's give that a little bit of extra light and air to the crowns of the two trees either side. And on the right-hand side, it's just a tree that's beginning to dominate its neighbours. We've selected one that we want to keep, that may be a different species that's particularly more valuable. Maybe that's an oak tree growing up amongst a stand of birch and willow, and that we want the oak tree to survive. So we remove its bigger, larger neighbour. So it's removing things from the wood. Every one of those we can sell. Some have higher value. We want to keep possibly the better trees in the wood to get bigger, because bigger trees generally equal higher value. And we retain trees that are desirable, or remove trees that are undesirable. And that's why Jez was talking about at the end of it, that the thinning operation is just mind-bogglingly complex. On one hand it is, but it's not rocket science. It's something you just have to get used to, working with the forest, seeing how, when you remove a tree, how the neighbours respond. It's why I became a forester, just interacting with the forest over a lifetime. It's a very, very rewarding skill to develop. But the critical thing is it improves the stand quality. Think, though, about the very end of that forest. Are you going to plant all the trees and then cut them down as a clear fell at the end of that particular rotation, be it 40, 50, 100 years, depending on the species, depending on the rate of growth, and then replant? That's what Chris referred to as traditional forestry. That's when we plant a monoculture, grow the monoculture, thin the monoculture, and then harvest it, plant the same species back, plant a new species. Or do we go for a continuous cover system? Now, I work in forest resilience. I look at the threats for climate change. I'm going to suggest you start by looking at the right-hand image, because it is more resilient against most of the threats that climate change brings. We can have several species growing together. We can have a light-demanding species up above a more shade-tolerant species. That species diversity creates more opportunities for wildlife. It's just more attractive.
John, just like a minute or so.
Yeah, I'm on my last slide now. So
Brilliant.
the very final thing is, it sounds complex. Jez put the fear of God into you about how complex it was. We've tried to make it easy. When you buy a new TV, you get a manual. We've created this for mixed forest. They're called forest development types. I won't go through it now, but it's just a two-sided piece of paper that gives you the management instructions for a forest for the best part of 100 years. And hopefully that's my last slide. Just click to the next one to see if it. Oh. Okay, yeah, so that's just to bring up the timeline. Yeah, so there you go. And any questions on that, please do pop in the chat.
Thanks, John. That was a brilliant overview of how to get started with planning and productive forestry. So I am literally going to only talk for a very few minutes on funding available if you are thinking about starting a productive forest, whether that's conifer or broadleaf. I will say we ran a webinar at the beginning on grant funding, so that goes into a lot more detail about the grant offer, but I just want to kind of highlight a few of our grant offers. So we've got the England Woodland Creation offer, which hopefully all of you are familiar for. It will pay for the standard costs, the trees, the guards, the fencing. One of the things I want to highlight is the infrastructure payments as well within UCO. So really important that you get the infrastructure right if you are planning a productive woodland, because you need to think about, as John mentioned, the ongoing management of that woodland. So areas, tracks, access tracks are really important. Stacking areas for the timber, how you're going to get the timber machinery into the site and contractors in. So the infrastructure payments are really beneficial in that woodland creation offer. There's the maintenance payments in there as well, which can help with early establishment of the trees. And you've also got the public benefits within the grants, the low sensitivity payment areas where you're not in a sensitive landscape, such as a national park, which a bit more considerations needed. And then we've got the additional contributions. Quite often people think the additional contributions are just about native trees, but also you can build in some conifer into those additional contributions. So it's well worth kind of exploring a bit more in detail about the funding that can support your producing and establishing a woodland. So if you are in a sensitive landscape and you are thinking about a productive woodland and you are thinking about non-native species and conifer species, it's a great idea to look at using the Woodland Creation Planning Grant, which will basically help identify all the things that you might need to consider in a bit more detail when you're planning a productive woodland. There is great money to be able to support you to do this, from all the desk-based research, from the consultation, from surveys that you might need to do, to actually designing of that woodland. And we can support you through that process as an area team. Also, great partnership scheme as well. We work closely with Forestry England. They have their own grant scheme that they can help. So if you are interested in productive forestry, but actually don't want the hassle of actually doing all the hard work, you can actually rent your land over to Forestry England. They will establish a productive forestry for you and they will manage it. And in return, you'll get that income, that rental income, but you'll also receive any carbon credits that woodland generates. There's been some great successful projects on that. I'm not going to go through these in detail because we're a little bit pushed for time, but once your established woodland is 15 years old, there is a whole raft of funding available to support the management of your woodland. The key thing is to get the top one in place, a woodland management plan, which means you can then access much of the other funding that is available, mostly through a higher tier and the standalone higher tier capital grants. So it will cover things like squirrel management, deer control. You can get extra deer fencing if needed as well. So just a little bit on the woodland management plan grants before I hand over to Robert. So a woodland management plan is basically a 10-year woodland management plan. It sets out how you're going to manage that woodland, and it's really important to have this in place, particularly if you've got a productive forest. You'll be given £1,500 to actually write that woodland management plan. You'll get a felling license and you can apply all year round. The great news, you used to have to have 3 hectares of woodland to qualify for this woodland management plan grant. That has been reduced this year down to 0.5 of a hectare of woodland. So if you've got some woodland, as well as thinking about producing a new woodland, is over 0.5 of a hectare, then really consider this as an option. I am swiftly going to hand over to Robert. So Robert, if you're able to come on, that would be great. Thank you, Robert. And hopefully you should be able to take control of the slides this time.
Not yet.
Don't quite know what that's working. I'll move them on for you. There we go.
Right, afternoon everybody. My name is Robert. I'm the Managing Director at Bronwyn and Abbey. We're a forestry management company, but we do both the consulting and the delivery part all the way through to harvesting and thinning. Some really great conversations from and points raised by colleagues and peers earlier on. I'm just going to go through some kind of key points and go through one case study quite quickly. We just pop to the first slide, please. So why productive forestry? Many of peers here have covered off some of the key points. All woodlands should be productive to some extent. There's absolutely no reason why you can't maximize your income, work with neighboring estates. One thing we do quite a lot of is we create packages of work for contractors at scale, but in a local area, and then make it more cost effective for landowners. There's a lot of support there from UK government at the moment for woodlands. And I think it's important that broadleaf and conifer can be productive. We have the roadmap in England now for timbering construction. Some of the things that Jez was talking about earlier, different uses of product, different uses of species. A really good example of the industry moving would actually be Phytophthora, which affected larch. A lot of people weren't sure what to do with it. And now it's quite a high demand timber, actually, even in the larger sawmills. Because it was available, the market developed itself. In terms of delivering species diversity, we need to plant more at scale, and that would be both the public and private sector, to give the mills more flexibility and more ability to do more with those products. Woodlands I'd like to think that no forester wants to plant your entire farm. Woodlands can be part of your landscape, part of the estate, part of your land holding. They offer a host of other benefits away from timber. And one of the case study I'm about to bring up, there we go. So Bradford Estate, it's in the West Midlands, 97 hectares across a total of 36 compartments. And we've put a summary in there of what's in there in terms of the payments that Joe mentioned earlier. Now, this is a predominantly productive woodland creation, and it's on the less productive or difficult to farm land within the holding. We have created a huge amount of recreational access, which totals almost 20 kilometres of permissive access. We have got nature recovery premium payments, higher nature recovery payments, low nature recovery payments, water quality, riparian planting. And this scheme is still 62% conifer across the board. So in terms of resilience, I noticed there's a question earlier about should conifer be mixed in or things like that. This scheme's a great example. We've done a bit of everything here. We have got areas where there's conifer mixed in with broadleaves. We've got areas where conifer is mixed in with other conifers. And we've also got areas where they are pure blocks of conifer, but in the landscape scale and across the whole forest management unit of this land holding, they're actually quite small blocks. In terms of planning for this, we've planned for future harvesting, but even down to how the trees are planted, which way they face down slopes. But also, in terms of maintenance, which is quite an interesting one, we've planted specific herbal lays in some of the areas which were on very poor or poor draining parts of arable fields. and the herbal lays should not interfere with the tree's growth. We've got different rooting depths in the herbal lays. All they should need is possibly mowing, although we're hoping that the first year or so they won't even need mowing. Mowing works really well. Again, it only works if you plan for it. You need to think about your access for machines. You need to think about your access for maintenance. Spraying chemical across 97 hectares wouldn't really work. It would be also quite expensive and have quite a lot of damage to the environment. But doing small things like planning your mowing, planning how you're going to look after it, and another part which is funded under the UCO scheme is the extensive amount of deer fencing we've installed here. It's just over 13 kilometres, I think, in total. It's all about planning, and I'd like to think that's come from everybody's talks today. It's about where you want to go, what you want it to deliver. The purpose of this woodland is to connect existing woodlands, sequester carbon, and enhance the estate's productive forestry element. A total of 16 species, which is quite a lot for a single woodland creation. We've also got 4 different spacings. So there's quite a mixed variety of woodland, and it will be a very mixed woodland upon completion. The UCO scheme has been, including the additional contributions, it works well for the landowner, and we've got the 15 years of maintenance payment at £400 per hectare. We've considered that we've also got capital items for deer seats, recreational infrastructure. That includes footbridges, picnic benches, way markers. It's all there, and it's all there as part of the UCO offer. Don't seem to. Well, thank you very much. So the woodland creation offer is there for the landowners. It's there for you. I'd strongly suggest to anybody that they actually talk to a forester and people who understand the scheme and understand how to deliver the scheme. But it's really important that you understand your objectives, which a number of people have talked about today. Knowing what you want to achieve from that woodland is critical at the outset. Making changes very late in the day is time consuming and can be quite expensive. You want to have an idea of where you want to go. There is a common misconception that seems to float around the industry that the UCO incentivises you to plant more broadleaves, which it doesn't. The English Woodland Creation Offer is there to create a UKFS compliant woodland. And yes, they do pay, the grant does pay extra for deer protection, which does actually increase your grant income. That isn't necessarily the most economical way to deliver a woodland. And conifers add to your resilience of the woodland. They've got very good timber markets. We've got that infrastructure in the country, and there is the expertise among smaller and larger companies and harvesting businesses to deal with those products and get them to market. I know Jez mentioned earlier that biomass sounds like an awful thing. I agree that we should always be growing for productive timber. If you're growing for conifer, you'd like to be aiming towards no more than 20% of your crop ending up as biomass in your final selling stage. But the biomass market is here at the moment. It does allow you to support your woodland. It does allow you to monetize it, manage it better, and make more of what you've got and what you could have in the future. Been quite a lot of talk about thinning today. I've quite interesting that Jez described it as nerve-wracking. It can be, and I think one thing we've lost in this country is the ability to be quite bullish in how we approach our thinning. We generally underthin across the board, actually, and the expertise isn't there in the management across the country as it used to be many years ago. And also, because of the cost of labour, the cost of machines, the cost of equipment, there's a pressure to do it faster and quicker, which doesn't always deliver that quality that you want. At the end of the day, any woodland, broadleaf or conifer, we should be growing purely to produce quality timber out of that managed crop. And then we have areas that we manage for nature, manage for riparian buffers, leave as non-intervention areas and protect habitats and wildlife. But our productive areas of woodlands should be producing quality timber. And we do have pests and diseases. We do have ips coming in across southeast England. We've got deer and squirrels of both problems. And historically, we had Phytophthora, which is still spreading throughout the UK. Phytophthora ramorum, sorry. And ash dieback has been quite a kick for a lot of owners, actually. And alder, as Jez mentioned, is something that is being planted. We need to have a buy-in from the owners to want to manage their woodlands. The industry will help you do it, and the ability to deliver that is there. So I just reach out to the industry, and people will help. And the colleagues in Forestry England and Forestry Commission are always happy to help anybody that they can with their woodlands. Any questions about stuff, give me a shout.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Robert. That was brilliant. I will actually stop sharing my screen now as we're kind of on the last bit. I would just like to say forest agents are worth the weight in gold. If you are thinking about planning a productive woodland and you don't have too much knowledge, you can come to us to ask for help and support. As the regulators, we can't do grant applications for you, etc. That's where a forest agent can give you lots of time. If you are thinking about exploring the opportunities to plant a new woodland, you can come to us. I am a land use advisor, so we can look at the opportunities, the considerations that you need to take, and then we can signpost you to various agents. So I'm going to hand over.